As we're a couple minutes past the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get things started. We want to be mindful of your time with us today. So welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Andrew McDougall. I'm on the marketing team here at Proof, and we're incredibly excited to welcome you to today's webinar where our team is going to share Proof's vision for the future of identity. Now, our team knows that you have a ton going on at work, that you could be doing plenty of things with this hour of time. We're really grateful that you've chosen the next hour to spend it with us, and we are really excited for all of the content that is in store. So just a couple of housekeeping slides before we get things started. First, this webinar is being recorded. We will share that recording with you after the fact. If you have to jump early for any reason and you still want to access all this great content, we're going to get it into your hands, so don't worry about that. Should you have questions, if you have any tech issues, there's a chat feature on your Zoom toolbar. You can engage with our team and we can do our best to help you deal with anything that comes up on the technical issues side. If you do have questions, we plan to do a Q&A if time allows at the end of this webinar. There is a Q&A module on the Zoom toolbar where you can place your questions. When it comes to the Q&A time later in the webinar, we will focus on the questions that have come into the Q&A portion, just because sometimes the chat function can get a little loud. So we want to make sure that your questions are answered. So please put those in the Q&A if you have them. And then at the end, you're going to have a chance to complete a survey about today's presentation. If this is your first time attending a Proof webinar, welcome. Surveys mean a lot to us. We love surveys. They go a really long way towards ensuring that we are building content that really matters to you and speaks to the things that you're seeing in your industries. And so we really want your voice to be heard. We really value that input. So please, if you just take a moment or two at the end of this webinar to give us that feedback, that goes a really long way. So we really have quite the slew of presenters today, the Proof Avengers, if you will, which I think makes Pat Captain America as the first Avenger. But first, we'll kick it off with Pat Kinsell, who is our CEO. We'll hand things off to Darren Louie, who's our VP of Product, to talk about how we plan to build a product that supports our vision for the future of identity. We'll move things off to Kelly Pahersky, who is our VP of Solutions Consulting, to talk about how that can directly benefit our customers, many of you who are on this call or may hopefully soon be customers of ours. And then we'll turn things over to James Fulgenzi, who's our Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy, to talk about some really exciting content that we're creating in the space as we produce content in the thought leadership capacity about what we think the future of identity should look like. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Pat.
Hello, hello. Andrew, maybe not if you can hear me, just to confirm.
Dan, confirm.
I appreciate it. Great to be with everyone. I see some friendly names and folks I've known a long time, and I really appreciate you joining and your continued support. I'm really excited about not just the webinar today, but a lot of the content that we're going to be putting out. We've been on a real decade-long journey, and I feel like we're really this year starting to execute against what our vision really is as a company. And so, really excited to open that discussion up with all of you, to get feedback, and to hopefully have you follow along on this journey with us. I also happen to pick a room where the lights shut off automatically, so hopefully this goes okay. So I think not everyone, but most folks know that we used to be Notarizing. We changed our name to Proof. And when we did, we really took on this much larger mission as a company, which is we want to help you trust your customers. This image, some of you may have seen us describe before, but in the background, this is all AI-generated images about trusted transactions. And whether you go back hundreds of years or the bottom right is actually in the year 2300 in the future, when it contemplates trust, it presumes you're sitting down at a table, the people you're doing business with, and that's a really critical, part of commerce. The truth is you don't actually know your customers anymore predominantly, and there's so many statistics out there for every industry, but we all know with COVID, there was this total acceleration of digitization. And what industry has really learned is that, digital provides better customer experience, reduced costs, better insights, and people have really gone, whole cloth digital, that now many of the largest banks are saying 90% of their customers predominantly interact with them digitally. I have relationships with institutions that I transact with all the time, and I've never met them. I've never stepped foot in one of their branches. I've never physically interacted with anyone at these companies. And so there's a real challenge these days with, how to trust the people that we're doing business with, how to make really critical decisions, sending them money, issuing them a loan, whatever it may be. And as a society today, especially with a lot of the advancements in technology, this is becoming a really pressing issue. I think what's interesting is that, I don't think people fully appreciate how widespread this problem is. You read the examples all the time of the CEO who got, or CFO who got tricked into sending the $25 million. What we're seeing in our business is this is pervasive. Every industry in every part of their business is dealing with this issue of trust and whether or not they have certainty in the people that they're, transacting with. And so we thought we'd sort of give some examples that might expand people's appreciation for the problem. And so, the question here, who would have thought that utility companies would be getting scammed? This is a huge problem that the utility industry is dealing with. And if you think about some of the consumer protection laws around utility companies where they can't shut your power off, people are pretending to be someone else to get, power turned on in their house or to get various incentives and bonuses and whatnot. And they're complete scammers who either get paid for a couple months of referral or get a couple free months of power. And it's becoming such a pervasive problem that just in one state, it's estimated to be a $100 million issue. Another example is recruiting. We're now hearing that this is a problem that's affecting almost every company, and they're getting fake applicants. And unfortunately, it's really nefarious. It's not just, for fun. It's not just someone pretending to be more qualified than they might be. There are state actors, for example, the country North Korea, and they are getting extremely good at this. And what they're doing is they're either getting through your hiring process with a totally fake identity, they're doing video interviews with complete, fake personas and deep fakes, and they're getting a job. And either they're collecting a couple months of salary before you figure it out, or they're then installing malware and other terrible, software within your systems, and they're stealing corporate assets. And this is a problem that, again, every industry is faced with. It's happening with new applicants. It's also happening in the IT department. People saying they lost their computer, their password needs to be reset. So many people think about this type of fraud as being in financial services, but this identity-related fraud, whether or not you can trust the person on the other side of a transaction, is pervasive in basically every scenario that you could imagine. Another one that I think is just really shocking to people is this issue of deed fraud and this notion that someone can steal your home out from underneath you. And this is really pervasive, particularly on vacant land. But people are also doing this with cash out refis, HELOCs, and basically either stealing your property or stealing the hard-earned equity that you have in your home. And why I think this is such a compelling example is that it also speaks to how broken the whole infrastructure of, the industry and the regulations are. The real estate industry, as you get handed from the realtor to the mortgage lender to the title company, as you process documents that are then sent to the county recorder, there's so many opportunities for fraudsters to take advantage of the disconnects in those systems. The public records that exist, the ability to go out and mine information about homes that are owned free and clear, the owners, their jobs. It's so easy to mine this data. And a lot of the policies in the country say that county recorders are actually not even authorized. It's not just that it's not their responsibility, but they're not even authorized to assess the identity of the person that's filing documents. And so this is to me an example of how everyone really needs to take a step back at these problems and think about a new approach to solving them and to restoring certainty. And unfortunately, no longer seeing is no longer believing. And I think we've all seen something on the internet in the last 18 months that just like amazed us with how fake it was, right? And it's everything from photos. I have the latest, you know, Chat GPT and other things on my phone, and in 30 seconds I can produce an image of James on the call that you would all think is completely realistic, on the moon. Videos. There's a impersonation case with Leonardo DiCaprio lately. Phone calls. A frantic call from your mother saying you need to send money urgently, or from your child. This is causing real harm and real distress for a lot of people. In the document space, there are services online now where someone can go and for dollars can produce an entire fake history of someone's life, of their employment, of their financial history. So if you're a mortgage lender, how do you now know that someone's income and assets and everything that they provide to you are true and legitimate? And then the records that we produce, it's in the private industry, it's in government, it's in permits, it's in authorizations. And so we've now, jumped from should I be concerned about what I'm looking at to presuming that you can't trust it and you need further evidence that it's from the person that it claims to be, that it's unaltered, and that it's a legitimate piece of content that you're looking at. And so some data behind this problem. So, this is from FinCEN. Interestingly, on the left, this is from 2021. That's the most recent year that they had data. So we'll soon get the report for 2022. But I think we all can intuitively understand that this problem is getting worse at a really rapid rate. And so these numbers are outdated. What's interesting, though, is I would draw your attention to the bottom, the third-party money laundering. And so this is most of the identity industry's focus. Most companies that we either compete with or partner with have been focused on this third-party money laundering. And this is because the federal government created policies around what's called Know Your Customer, KYC, and AML, which is anti-money laundering. And it was about ensuring that bad actors didn't open bank accounts. But if you think about that, that's protecting the bank from a fraudster. But once you, a legitimate person, have given your money to the bank, you want to be certain that they're protecting it. What could be the retirement industry? I can give so many examples. And that's where these issues of false records and identity theft come in. And they're much larger problems in aggregate than third-party money laundering. And regulators have started to take notice. And so the tools that people are using for these are e-signature platforms, forms platforms, and regulators have come out with warnings about, people's obligation to protect fraud and the shortcomings in these systems. And so we really need to think about new tools that address some of these problems. Here is another warning about the rise of deepfakes. Again, I go back to the stories, the utility company, the hiring. The truth is that whether it's the regulators or the researchers, people are behind on recognizing that this is a problem, but it's becoming so pervasive that people are starting to call it out and really pushing people to find solutions to solve this problem and restore trust in these transactions. To put some numbers behind that, so Deloitte has done a study and they project another $40 billion of fraud just from deepfakes by 2027. Look, I think this is grossly undercounted. We know from a lot of our customers, they don't report the full scale of the fraud problems that they have. And just the issues that we're hearing are just incredible around generative AI, deepfakes, false records, and content. And so, we'll use 40 billion because it's a well-cited source, but I think the problem's much larger than that. So what if there was a trusted network to solve this problem? I mean, that's really sort of the framing question to address this issue that we have for everyone on the phone. What if we all came together to solve this problem, right? And what if we all contributed to really being able to trust someone as they transact online and they pass between our respective companies and transactions? And what if we told you that this concept exists? I mean, I think one of the things that I always say is, we don't need to reinvent how to solve a problem, right? And so, there is already a network that exists in the world that more than 1 billion people have that processes trillions of dollars in value with a fraud rate of less than 1% that is accepted globally. But it's really only for payments. It doesn't serve the types of transactions that we're talking about. And that solution is a Visa, it's a MasterCard, it's an American Express. Like these are systems today that we all carry in our pockets that solve, trillions of dollars of, of value of transaction volumes with very low fraud rates that protect people's privacy and really work tremendously on a global scale. And so for us as a company, when we think about the problems that we want to solve, we really want to look to examples that we can follow in industries we can model ourselves on. Now, the problem, of course, is that everything we're talking about isn't a payment, right? These are purchase order authorizations. These are loans. These are, beneficiary designation. These are things that are signed. These are things that are authorized. And so for us, the challenge is how do we take the best learnings from how people have solved fraud at tremendous scale and bring them into the other side of the economy, which is frankly a larger space with an enormous opportunity to solve the problem. And so again, Visa being the original authorization network, this word authorization we think is really a critical term. And a lot of our partners and customers initially came to us because they wanted help with digitization. And now what they're really trying to understand is, can they trust the person on the other side of the transaction so they can authorize a business decision? And can they do that in an automated fashion and just approve the transaction and send the money out? So digging into the history of Visa, this is actually taken from one of their old decks from a long time ago. And their vision said was, we're paying for something can be translated into photons and electrons that move across the globe at the speed of light. And so their vision was always about digitization, right? It was always about bringing these transactions into a network where they can flow, across the globe in real time as packets of information. It doesn't say anything about payments, right? It talks about value, it talks about transactions, it talks about a global network approach. So looking at the history of this, for folks who are my age and older, so there goes the lights. Hopefully you can still see me. The way that you used to pay for a credit card transaction was you'd walk into a store and they would literally imprint it on a card. And if you think about the way that that actually functioned, you'd walk in, you'd want to buy a television, you'd present your credit card, they would swipe this and they would, scan the card and they'd let you walk out with it. And in order to detect fraud in that scenario, this piece of paper would get shipped off to some center where they would call the bank, it would be approved. Perhaps in a little black book, that card number had been flagged for fraud. But in the meantime, the person would have gone from, Sears to Macy's to wherever else and conducted all sorts of fraud. There was no way to stop them at the time of the transaction, and it was a really inefficient process. And frankly, the industries that we serve, we see being in the same place in their journey. So many industries, whether it be retirement, wealth management, real estate, commercial lending, I could go on for a long period of time. They function exactly like that retailer in the 1970s that's trying to process a transaction. You fill something out in paper, it gets shipped. They're looking at it to see if they can trust the transaction. They're shipping it off. Weeks later, they're determining there's fraud. There's no way to find the bad actor after the fact. There's no exchange of information or signal, even internally across their own departments. And so we see a similar journey, which is the first thing we have to do is actually digitize these transactions. And that's what we've spent the first decade of our business doing, is working with our customers and really helping them digitize this key business process. And when we look to the future, again, it's really about that authorization and the business decision that underlines it. And so there's been an evolution in the credit card, networks and their histories. People literally started out with a little piece of paper, and they actually used a signature to authenticate the card. You would take this card into a store. The likelihood back in the days they knew you. It was probably a store issued card. It wasn't a bank issued card. They would look at that signature. They'd have you, sign the receipt. They would do a comparison. The move to plastic embossed cards was really around efficiency and around automated data capture, the move to the magnetic stripe the same. And where we find ourselves today is that credit cards actually have a chip in them. And what these chips do is they represent you in that network. Again, go back to that vision mission statement, a global network with photons, traversing at the speed of light in a network to solve trust. And so every time you use your card, what they do is they embed that payment with your actual card's identity through this chip that's in the card itself. And so that's what we think really is the key to solving these problems, is these authorizations that are cryptographically signed with your credential. And when we look to how to take this, historical, very successful and effective innovation called the credit card network, and we think about how to really stop fraud in all of the transactions that we process, we think that signing something cryptographically with someone's identity is the real key to solving this problem. And that's where we've been focused for a long time. And we also think that the network model is really the key to solving risk and protecting, a business and a consumer. If you think about your credit card, you can go into one store and then into another. And if you're reported for committing fraud, or if there's a risk in your transaction, or if you make a phone call in, the merchant A doesn't share any of your information with merchant B. They just simply shut your card off, and that protects that network. And so again, thinking back to having a secure credential that can represent you and people contributing fraud data, we think it's the privacy preserving solution to solving this problem really on a global scale with real, efficacy and fraud mitigation. And so, what does that mean, right? It means that anyone can flag fraud on a transaction. So you're going to see a lot of work from us. We've made a lot of progress on this lately, but to get better feedback from our customers, we've built a ton of tooling for notaries to report more fraud, but also for the business users on our platform. We're making a huge investment in the ability to detect and stop fraud in real time, but also to remediate decisions or concerns in real time. If you see a risk flag in our Defend product, how might you want to step it up to gain additional assurance so you can authorize that transaction? Again, on a credit card, if you call in and you say, "Hey, I lost my card on Tuesday," they can actually unwind the transactions that you did, thereafter. We think the same is critical when you're authorizing things, signing things, approving things, and if they can be tied to you, it gives the chance to unwind and roll back the things that you're doing across the platform. And ultimately, the same vision of really standing behind the transactions for all participants in the network. And for consumers, when you use your card and you're traveling, you know that if for some reason you're scammed, you're going to be protected by the strength of this network. And we believe the same is really critical for the consumers on our platform as well. So that's our focus. We're focused on becoming what we're calling the identity authorization network for everything else. And yes, we're going to continue to invest in all of the workflow and the new transactions that we want to be able to serve all of you, but really helping people make business decisions around whether or not you can trust the other person on the side of the transaction. We had a major customer recently tell us, they said, "Look, you have digitized my intake, but I still have 5 people looking at every transaction trying to decide if I can send out the money." And so for us, we want to help them automate that, make better decisions, and deliver, better customer experience. We're focused on secure credentials so that everything across our network can be signed with someone's identity, just like how it functions in a payment network. And then moving towards this network-based notion of transactional safety, fraud reporting, really thinking about how we can come together in a privacy-preserving way to solve this problem. So today, this concept of a signed record we already have, and we're frankly lucky. I think every company is either the victim or the benefactor of their history. And a lot of the online notarization law mandated that people had to use a PKI certificate. So that chip on a credit card is a PKI certificate. So we've been signing our records with the same thing for the entire history of our business. And so when you get a document that's signed by our platform, it is already linked back to the person who signed it. We hadn't had the orchestration to trace that or check that. And that's really what we're focused on going forward, again, in that more network-based model. And we think that this concept of an identity authorization network is a transformational concept. There's an organization called Liminal, which recently came out with a deep dive on this concept. I really recommend that people get this report from them. And if you're on a digital transformation journey, they're a fantastic organization to work with. We highly, highly recommend that you do so. But they really looked at the breadth of this problem across, industries and came to the conclusion that it's transformational. Again, I brought up the hiring example earlier. When people think about fraud, it's a much larger, more pervasive problem than people understand, and we think transformational for society. They did a deep dive on some of the tools and the problem out there and what's required. And if you think about this notion that some transactions really require you to do more. If you're getting a mortgage, you may have to comply with state law, county law, the title underwriter policy. You may really need to step it up. Other transactions may allow someone to have a saved identity that they can use with very low friction. So thinking about the spectrum of the transactions that people want to process, what does a holistic platform look like? And a survey they did of financial services companies, 75% of respondents said they're extremely concerned about the risk of fraud in their electronic signatures and documents, and 86% said that they'd be interested in new solutions. And so our view is that the predominant tools that exist in the market don't do enough, and that there's a real opportunity to solve this problem, and we're really excited to work with many of you on this journey. And so that's why we built Proof. I think, frankly, some folks thought we were nuts ages ago to change the name of the company, but we had this much larger vision, which was how do we really help people, trust the transactions on our platform? How do we solve this issue of, changing society, a move to digital, not knowing who you're doing business with? And so we're really proud to be bringing this to market. A lot of these new products, sorry, all of these new products on the screen we launched in the last 2 years. So we've taken our notarized product. We now have a more secure version of e-signature, standalone identity verification, our new product Verify, which for that HR use case, IT, account takeover and recovery, and of course our real estate business, which we're so proud, to have really grown up in real estate. Defend, we've made just tremendous investments in Defend, which is our fraud mitigation platform. You're going to see a lot from us. And I think it's also important really to highlight the role of the notary. I mean, we've really grown up working with notaries, and we see them as being the critical agent for trust into the future. A lot of these transactions, if you do an identity process and someone fails digitally, the law says that they can connect with a human agent, and that human agent can help to make the right decision. And we believe that the notaries are who should play that role in the future. And we want to work with all of you on the phone to access these new types of transactions and to really solve this identity problem, for industry well into the future. And then lastly, I didn't mention Command Center, which is all about enterprise administration and setting your own policies for all these different types of transactions. And so with that, a deeper dive on the specifics, I'm going to hand it over to Darren, and I appreciate everyone's time very much today. All right, Darren.
All right. Thanks, Pat. All right. So just to tee up the problem, when you think about the entire customer life cycle, there's a ton of things that a customer is authorizing every day. So let's say, imagine you were in financial services. Sure, you may have verified someone's identity at the time of opening an account, but after that, they're wiring money, they're rolling over funds from their 401k, they're giving other people authority to access their account or make decisions on their behalf. They're applying for new services like a loan. They might be making changes to their account or resetting their password. And so today, many of these flows have, very little security behind them. People are submitting forms or calling into your help desk. That's really where the struggle is. If it's a phone call, if it's a document, if it's an email, how do you really know this is your customer? And so Proof is this platform that can secure any client authorization. Some of these authorizations obviously require a signature. So sometimes these documents need a notary. That's why we have notarized. You think about, these forms like spousal consent, power attorney forms, that sort of thing. Some of these other authorizations are just a signature, and that's why we have sign. Sometimes you need, to verify someone's identity. Maybe that's at account opening. Maybe that's when they change their address. Or maybe when you suspect someone's actually taken over their account and you want to put them through an identity process. And then there's these moments where it's really, really important. You're trying to make a critical decision whether you should trust this authorization or not. And you want to get that client face to face and them on video saying, yes, this was me. So you can think about things like fraud escalations when you step up, when you suspect there's a case of fraud and you want to step up into a meeting and meet with an agent, doing things like large money wires and that sort of thing. That's why we introduced Verify last year. And all of these transactions run on a platform that has fraud prevention built in, so you can really know what's real, what's fake as it runs through the platform. And I think the key thing here is being able to save your identity, because as we just talked about, you want to protect all of these customer-facing interactions, but you're not going to put identity verification in front of everything, right? You're not going to ask your customer to keep uploading their ID, constantly peppering them to answer KBA questions. And so as a consumer completes an authorization on our platform, we have the opportunity to really enroll them in a digital identity. So anything else they do on our network becomes super seamless. And so this is what that looks like. So let's say a customer needs to sign a power attorney form, which in this case requires a notarization. The first thing they'll do is verify their identity. They'll answer KBA questions, scan their ID, maybe even scan a biometric. And then we can present them with the option, hey, would you like us to remember you? So the next time you come through, you don't have to go through the hassle again. And they can click this button, save my ID, and then boom, we create a digital identity for this consumer, and it's backed by a digital certificate. And then you continue with the process, you connect with the notary and complete your form. And so the next time that the consumer comes to our platform to do anything else, it becomes super easy with zero friction. So let's say, you're trying to wire some money out and your account has been flagged. And now you actually want the person to meet with an agent So same thing, they get welcome back, Jenny. Instead of having to scan your ID again, we're just going to scan your biometrics. Boom, connect you with an agent right away. Now the consumer is online with an agent in our Verify product, and the agent is able to verify their identity and collect additional documentation, ask questions, and then capture the entire session on video. And of course, there's a ton of things that customer needs to sign as well. And so if there's a form that needs their signature, don't answer KBA questions anymore. No more SMS OTP. It's welcome back, Jenny. Scan your face. Boom, done. You signed the document. And what's different here that it's different than a basic signature. You're not just getting a document with an image of a signature on the page, but instead the document's actually digitally signed, with my identity. And it's like that cryptogram example in payments. And so that the document and the bytes of the document can be verified that was digitally signed with that identity. And it's not possible to just take a photoshopped image of my signature and putting it onto another document. And so that's where we're going as a society, this notion that you can't just like eyeball something anymore. The only things you're going to trust or accept is if you know it's actually real. So Pat talked about this early on. There's really a standards body that is emerging to solve this problem. It's called C2PA. So in the future, you're going to see this photo and not really know if you can trust it unless it's signed by a reputable organization or can be confirmed that it came from the lens of a camera. You're not going to see this video. You're not going to trust this video unless you know it's really confirmed by Leonardo DiCaprio. Or you might get these bank statements, but a picture of your bank statement is not going to be enough. There needs to be that verification that it actually was issued by Chase Bank. And of course, when you see a signature, it needs to be verifiable so that you know this person signed. And that's where we're going, right? And that's how we're really going to solve this problem. You now have this platform that can be used for all of these customer-facing authorizations. And so for the first time ever, you can actually bring real security into these flows because we've digitized them. And it allows you to tie all of these things together onto a single platform. And then going back to this diagram, we really want to spend some time unpacking and explaining what defend is. And, it does not matter if you're signing documents or confirming your identity or appearing on video, regardless of the type of authorization you're performing on our platform, all of those transactions are protected by defend. So going back to our payment analogy, consumers know that every time they use their credit card, there's a ton of technology that's running in the background to detect if someone's stolen your card or not. But how come the same thing doesn't exist when we go to sign for things? And so it does now. That's what defend is. Defend has all the same sophistication. So we've combined all the capabilities. So anytime an authorization run on our network, we're checking to see if this is a real identity or synthetic identity. We're checking to see, we're looking at the phone to see if there's potential risk. Is this on a known carrier? Has it been SIM swapped recently? We're looking at the email to see if it's a brand new email that just showed up on the internet in the last 30 days. And we're looking at things like your location and the behaviors of your signing activity. Is this typically where Darren signs and from the device he normally uses when he signs for things? And we're the only platform that has deepfake detection built in with Defend. And it's not just deepfake detection at the time of presenting the ID documents or the selfie, but it's also on top of the video because a lot of our authorizations happen on camera and happen in this face-to-face interaction over video. So now on our platform, not only do you get, this verifiable record, that signed document, the signed video or signed content, but you're able to have more visibility about the customer. And so you're able to see everything you do with that particular identity. It's no longer just looking at a list of documents to find the notarization or find the signature. You actually get to see a list of users in the system that you've interacted with. These are your customers. Find that customer and drill in. And so now you get this 360 view, right? So here is an example of Jenny as your customer. You can see that we validated her identity. You could see the timeline of all your prior interactions with her. And we can also tell you more things. We could tell you she's been a member of our network for longer than she's been your customer. So we've seen Jenny many times before. We're pretty sure this is her. And here's that time that, she signed some document or appeared on video to authorize a wire. Here are these other documents she has signed, the notarization forms or the e-signatures. And here's also the time that you confirmed her identity. Maybe this is the time she called in to reset her password. So you just get a much richer profile of your customers the more things you run on our platform. And so to kind of wrap up, the key things we want you to take away for 2025, we're going to continue to add new ways for customers to digitize their authorizations and use our platforms. So we've already launched a bunch of different products to verify your identity, get on video with an agent, and we're going to continue to launch new products to help our customers use our platform. We believe all content and records should be digitally signed and made into these verifiable records. Later this year, we're going to introduce the concept of enabling consumers to enroll in a digital identity. And we're going to continue to invest and deliver on our fraud technology. And as transactions scale, this platform is just only going to get better. And then eventually our goal is to have these products that enable us to take on the risk. And when we do that, more businesses and consumers will trust our platform and rely on our platform every day to perform these types of authorizations. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly now, who's going to be able to share some customer success stories.
Awesome, Darren. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, Darren? I have to ask. Yep. Okay, awesome. So I think everything that Pat and Darren just shared, it likely resonates with you, or else you probably wouldn't be giving us your very valuable time. So what I'd like to share a little bit about are 3 different customer examples that I think, no matter what, what industry you're coming from, I think that these will resonate with you of things that we're doing and the real value and savings that we are helping them with. One of my probably favorite use cases here is with a financial services firm that their main focus is managing retirement funds. So no matter what, part of the world you're coming from or industry that you're coming from, there's a good chance that you have your money in some sort of a 401k, some sort of retirement fund. And, we're all working for that dream of someday being able to get to that money and save it up and whatnot. So imagine if you went to get your money and your money was no longer there because it had been fraudulently taken out, right? That's a terrible thing to think about, the years and years and years of work and effort that went into that. So this is a huge use case that we're working on with some of our financial institutions to help make sure that we can prevent that from ever happening. So a good example is this one here. The average fraudulent distribution that happens is about $157,000. That is not a little bit of money, in my opinion, at least. So imagine if you went to, again, take your money out of your retirement and found that that was all missing. That would be absolutely awful. So what we have really been able to do over the last several years is help to protect these different types of accounts. This year alone, we're projecting that we're going to be helping to secure $15 billion of retirement funds for everyone here in the United States. This is critical because what you may or may not really think a lot about is that while you may be the customer of that financial institution, your spouse or your beneficiary or someone else is not, right? So we need to really think about who is accessing our money and ensuring that the proper person or persons that are accessing the money are who they say they are. So this is one really, really critical aspect. The other piece of that is, I don't know about you, perhaps it's just me being lazy, but anytime I have someone say, oh, you've got to print that out and sign it. Just the idea of printing, which by the way, my printer is very close to my desk, having to print something, sign it, scan it, and send it back is awful. But if someone then said, you actually need to print that out, fill it out, drive somewhere, or wait for some, person to come show up at my house at a specified, and so on and so forth, it just takes a lot of time and effort. And I don't think anyone that's on the call here today has a lot of expendable time to be able to, try to process, as an example, getting your own money back. So with some of our customers, This is the type of return that they've been able to see. What's most important to me on this entire screen, there's a lot of great stats and data on here, but being able to provide that true disbursement of funds and knowing that these are the right people went from 2 weeks to about 6 hours. So again, imagine that you're at some point in your life and you need that money. Do you really want to wait for 2 weeks, right? Now, if someone said I have to wait for 2 weeks to make sure that it really is who I say I am, that's one thing. But if I could say I could get it in just a matter of hours, number one, and number two, know confidently that my money's been protected, that's a whole other story. So that customer experience is fantastic. But as you saw with everything that Darren just shared and what Pat was talking about as well, we're able to protect the organization also. So that's really, really key that they're being protected from a reputational perspective, financial perspective, regulatory perspective, and so on and so forth. So that's just one simple example. I do know that we have several, I believe it's title folks that are on the line. I saw a lot of different real estate, a lot of different title folks, things along those lines. And the real estate market is absolutely fascinating, especially right now. The ups and downs and things along those lines that we've been through in the last couple of years are no joke. But no matter what, our volume continues to grow. People still need to buy homes. They still need to refinance homes. There's a huge amount of effort that goes into the whole real estate process. And I'm sure that none of you are on here if you didn't already know that using a remote online notary solution such as Proof can be, number one, a huge time savings. It can also be a financial savings. But again, the really key thing here is about, in addition to all of that, protecting those individuals, protecting yourselves, protecting your organization, protecting that property. So even as we continue to become more and more of a virtual world, right? To me, it's still kind of hard to think about not closing in person. It's just like a rite of passage. But this is how it is today. We can do everything online. We absolutely have to protect ourselves. So being able to have a very solid $400+ cost reduction per file for lenders, 7-day reduction time. You know, people get very excited to either close or to sell and or buy a new home. Every extra day that we can get to them is huge. And then it just goes into your time as well. Your time is incredibly valuable. Now, the third example is around a large property and casualty insurance firm. There are a ton of different use cases that we're working with for our insurance companies, but the one that probably resonates, well, there's really two that resonate the most with me. One is around claims, and then the other one is around beneficiaries, right? So if something happens, if you're reaching out to your insurance company, it's probably not for a great reason, right? You may have been in an accident, something bad happened to your home. There's likely a reason that you're reaching out and making a claim. But you also all probably are very well aware there is a huge amount of paperwork that goes into it. So to me, from more of an emotional perspective, honestly, you may already be very overwhelmed with whatever it is that's going on. And then to add a bunch of confusing and difficult paperwork can be a challenge. And then again, you may have people coming into that situation, again, spouses, beneficiaries, whatever the situation may be, that are not the direct customer. So again, how do we protect the identity of the parties at hand? How do we protect your policies? How do we ensure that the organization, again, is protected while still battling that customer experience, right? When something happens, you don't want to have to sit around for weeks or months trying to figure out, did I do the right paperwork? Have I gotten that back? So things like a massive reduction in the number of hours that we've been able to provide for, in this case, just one particular PNC organization. We've done this in multiple situations for multiple insurance firms. Imagine going from a NIGO, and hopefully everyone knows what that means, but that means not in good order. So if you do finally figure out what one of those forms is, you fill out that form, you submit it. What NIGO means is if you missed a checkbox, if you filled in something incorrectly, if you didn't include your middle initial or something along those lines, and that form then has to go back to you after it was attempted to be processed, you have to figure out what went wrong. You've got to recomplete it. You've got to send it back. As you can imagine, that not in good order or NIGO can significantly increase the amount of time that is happening with these forms. And it can also just generally provide a lot of confusion and frustration and things along those lines. So when we can go from eliminating that back and forth altogether, the time savings, the frustration savings, everything along those lines is absolutely massive. So these are things that we're doing today for real customers. I'd love to have everyone be able to learn more about how we can do that with you at your organizations. And these are just three very simple examples. There's thousands more behind this. But what I'd like to do, speaking of how you can learn more, is I'd like to turn it over to James to tell you just that.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome.
Yes. Yep. Gotcha.
So we've gone over some really great topics today, and we want to give you some opportunities to learn even more. And that is why I am thrilled to introduce the Payment Parallel. This is a new series that explores the evolution of payment networks and provides a blueprint for the identity industry's future. It dives deeper into all the themes that we've discussed today. Chapter 1 is out now, and it provides a high-level overview of what you can learn from payments and the future of identity. The series is written by David Stearns. He's a real expert on these topics that we've gone over today. David is a software engineer, he's a historian, and he's an author of the widely cited book on the history of Visa and payment networks, Electronic Value Exchange. Chapter 1 is available now. So scan the QR code to access the ebook, and you'll also get early access for our soon-to-be-released podcast. We also have an exciting podcast trailer for you on that page, so please go check it out now. I'll give you all a second to scan that QR code, and then I'll hand it back over to Andrew.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I actually think we can leave this up while we go through a couple of Q&A questions to close out the rest of our hour together. So I'm going to pop those open real quick. We'll see. So if you have questions, submit them. I know we're tight on time. We got about 5 to 7 minutes. I want to make sure we release you all to get back to wherever you need to go before the top of the hour. So we'll answer as many as we can from now until then. And then we will reach out with as much insight as we can provide if we're not able to answer your question. So let me see. There was a question if this is recorded and being shared later. That is the case. So we will get this in your hands by tomorrow if you want to either rewatch this content or share it with colleagues, things like that. Let's see. There's a question here about without real signatures, how can we be sure that the person who withdrew money from a retirement account is the right person? The fraud person can deepfake the person by creating a filter that changes their image. Then they produce an ID that matches that filter. How do you detect those things?
I can take that one. Yeah, and this goes back to our investments in anti-fraud capabilities with Defend. Like we talked about, you're going to need layers of different verification checks in place because the chance that the fraudster is going to get everything perfect and replicate it as really Darren is really hard to do. So while we've seen and caught fraud of a fraudster able to change their face with the filter, they came through with an email address that doesn't match that end user, or they came through a phone number that ended up being a burner phone, or there's discrepancies between their desktop and their mobile phone, their desktop being in one location in the US and then their phone being outside the country simultaneously at the same time in the same notary meeting. So those are the things that you look for on the outsides. And so it's very easy to just look at the image and be like, yes, that might look like Andrew, but it requires inspecting the whole picture to really understand if it's really Andrew or not. And so that's what we're doing with Defend.
Great. Thank you, Darren. Let's see. So there is a question here that says, so does it mean if they complete the proof KBA credential analysis portion that they no longer have to go through the same process for a RON closing?
I could take that too. That's exactly the policy and the underwriting rules that we're trying to navigate right now. From a technology perspective, It's obviously, very secure. If we verified someone's identity before, just have them save their ID and scan their face, or confirm them via biometric next time. That's kind of an industry accepted security mechanism. But as we all know, it's all about making sure it's accepted from a policy perspective. And so making sure state laws have acceptance for us to do a biometric verification in replacement of KBA, and also working with the appropriate underwriters to get them comfortable with this notion of, doing a biometric instead of a KBA.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. Let's see. There was a question in the chat about a term that we used very early in the presentation about unwinding a transaction, specifically in the context of wires having gone out. I know that's a significant concern, especially for the real estate space. Darren, can you provide insight into like what it would actually mean to like unwind a
Yeah,
transaction?
I think the thinking is, obviously we don't control the payment networks or the money movement, but you think about the evidence that we would have and how fast it would be to help remediate or recover these funds and actually proceed with the legal proceedings. That's what, having proof allows you to do. So I think there were some examples in the chat about deed fraud. How powerful would it be to be like, there's no dispute, we actually have it on video, right? And we can resort to the evidence, the digital evidence in legal proceedings to really expedite that process, right? And so I think that's the way to think about it.
Right. And then Darren, I also think this is teed up for you, so thanks for carrying the team here. It was mentioned earlier that you utilize a digital certificate. Can you speak to its source authority and interoperability? Can it be used for other applications?
Yes, exactly. So we are the CA today for the notary certificates. We plan to issue digital certificates for consumers as well. Because we are using open PKI standards and participating in C2PA, we do plan to have, these consumer certificates be able to sign other content as well, not just documents and signatures, but even like photos, videos, other sorts of things that they want to certify personally. And because we are working with these standards frameworks, it should be interoperable. So if you were able to render one of our PDFs or documents in a validator that supports C2PA, it should be able to, show a green check mark and say that the bytes of this content and the integrity of this content remains intact.
Perfect. There's a few more questions in here. I think we're only gonna have time for one more. There's a question here that I think we get a lot, which is how receptive are customers to this idea of proof storing their information to later be used on the platform?
I think I'll just take this one too, since I'm
Thanks, Darren.
I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Obviously us being very sensitive to consumer privacy and protecting customer data is the most important thing. We're not in the business of selling consumer data for ads or any other purposes. And the real reason, the real value in what consumers are going to find is they are, number one, consumers are going to, going forward, be a little bit more skeptical about putting their IDs into all sorts of random different systems. So the notion that, you're going to have to upload your ID to multiple different systems and multiple different companies is just a scary proposition for consumers. So I think consumers are going to appreciate not having to do that over and over again. And number two, if there's actually a benefit for the consumer, I think there's a lot of more reception. There will be a lot more receptive to having, a company own their identity, because then there would actually be certain consumer protections in place and an amount of safety that a consumer gets by having a digital identity on any given network. That's the same reason why people choose to pay with their credit card versus use cash or versus using their debit card, because, there's certain security mechanisms and protections in place for a consumer. And I think that's what we need to think about as an industry. Always be thinking about what the consumer gets and how the consumer benefits, both from a privacy perspective, but also from a liability and trust perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren, for carrying Q&A. Thank you, James, Pat, Kelly, for your time here today and your expertise. We really are excited about what's to come for us and what that means for all of you as we combat kind of the growing threat of fraud in all of our lives. So there are additional questions in the Q&A. We're going to take those. We're going to reach out to you one-on-one and make sure that you have your questions asked. If you have additional questions, you are going to get the recording tomorrow. If you reply to that email, it goes directly to my inbox. So I'm happy to take on responsibility for making sure that you all get the answers that you need. Please, if you haven't already, grab your phone, scan the QR code for the payment parallel. There's a ton of great content in there. Again, we're releasing it chapter by chapter at a time. So if you engage with it today, we'll get those additional chapters in your inbox as they are released. It's really, really great content, and we're really excited about getting that in your hands. And again, as a reminder, there is a survey at the end of this. We would love your feedback on the presentation today, what went well, and especially what went didn't, so that we can make content that is really meaningful to you all. So thank you again for taking the time. We hope to see you on our next webinar. Have a good day, everyone.